All right, let's jump right in. We're about to crack open a single page of the Talmud, but we're not here for the ancient laws themselves. Nope. We're here to uncover this incredibly powerful and honestly unique way of thinking that's hidden inside. Think of this less like a history lesson and more like a masterclass in logic, in debate, and in the art of building a truly airtight argument. And it all kicks off with this really specific and kind of bizarre question. Sounds a little strange, doesn't it? But trust me, this is the key. This one oddball puzzle unlocks a fascinating legal detective story about how logic works, and maybe more importantly, where you have to draw the line. So let's open up our first case file, the curious case of the birds. We're diving headfirst into the middle of a really complex debate, a real meeting of the minds between two absolute intellectual heavyweights. Okay, before we get any further, there's one key term we've got to get straight, because it sets the whole stage. It's tarifa. Now, this just means an animal that has some kind of fatal injury or defect. So the big question is, can anything make this animal ritually pure, or is it basically a lost cause from the get-go? And here are our two main players. On one side, you've got Rabbi Meir. He makes what seems like a totally logical leap. He's like, look, we know for a fact that ritual slaughter can purify a fatally injured land animal. So since the special ritual for a bird offering is pinching its neck, well, that should work too. Makes sense, right? But then Rabbi Yossi just hits the bricks. He says, well, not so fast. Logic has rules. You can't just use it to create a ruling that's actually more lenient than your starting point. And that objection from Rabbi Yossi, it forces us to zoom out. We have to move from the very specific case of this bird to the actual tool they're both using to argue, the fundamental rules of logic itself. And this powerful tool, it has a name, Kal Vahomer. You might know it by its Latin name, a fortiori. It's a from the light to the heavy kind of argument. The basic idea is really simple. If something is true in an easy case, then it's definitely going to be true in a harder one. And this isn't some obscure little rule. This is a foundational pillar of how Talmudic reasoning works. So here's exactly how Rabbi Meir builds his Kal Vahomer. He starts with what's considered the severe case, a dead animal, which carries a high level of ritual impurity. Step 2, we know that ritual slaughter can purify it. Okay, so then he moves to the lenient case, a dead bird, which transmits less impurity. Therefore, he concludes its own special ritual act, pinching, should absolutely have the power to purify it. See? It's a clean, logical line straight from A to B. But here comes Rabbi Yossi with this killer counter-principle. He basically says that logic can't create new realities out of thin air. The result of your argument can't be stronger or more powerful than the fact you started with. And this, right here, this is the central conflict. How far can pure logic actually take you? This whole debate about the bird ends up forcing an even bigger, much more abstract question. The rabbis basically hit pause on the whole bird thing to investigate their own tools. Can you take a conclusion that you reached using logic, and then use that conclusion as the starting point for a brand new logical argument? And this move right here, this is classic Talmudic method. All of a sudden, the argument isn't really about the bird anymore. It's about the very nature of proof itself. Can you build a chain of logic where each link in the chain was forged by the one that came before it? To figure that out, the whole discussion pivots to a completely new set of cases. So how do they even test an idea like that? Well, they build a chain. They start with a known rule, something about meat from a certain offering. From that, they logically derive a rule about other sacrificial portions. Then, and this is the really cool part, they take that conclusion and they use it as the premise to derive a totally new rule about sacrificial blood. It's a perfect demonstration of logic building on logic, link by link. And believe me, it doesn't stop there. They just start throwing out a rapid-fire series of other examples. A rule about an offering taken outside the temple? Yep, derived from a different rule about a private altar. What about an impure offering? That's derived from yet another case about communal offerings. Every single one is another link, making the case stronger and stronger that these logical chains are totally valid. And so, after all that, they finally reach a conclusion. The answer, at least when you're talking about holy or consecrated matters, is a clear yes. You can build these incredibly intricate chains of reasoning. One logical conclusion really can become the premise for the next one. Okay, so now that we've got that principle established, let's open up a new case file. We're going to see how this whole logical toolkit applies to a completely different kind of puzzle. This time, it's about architecture and ritual at the Great Altar in Jerusalem. So here's the mystery. It's a simple, physical question. Why this one specific spot? I mean, of all the places on this huge square altar, why was the leftover blood from some of the most important sacrifices always poured on the western base? There has to be a reason, right? And it turns out the answer is tucked away in a verse from Leviticus. And you know what? It's surprisingly practical. It's really just about logistics. When the priest finished his service and walked out of the holy sanctuary, the very first part of the altar he would run into was, you guessed it, the western base. It was just the most direct path. Simple as that. But of course, they don't just stop there. They immediately use this fact to build brand new Kal Vahomer arguments. Both Rabbi Yishmael and Rabbi Akiva basically argue, hey, if this leftover blood, which doesn't even atone for sin, needs to be on a proper base, then it is an absolute certainty that the main blood applications, the ones that do atone for sin, have to be done on a part of the altar that has a base. It's just another beautiful example of this logical tool in action.
So we've gone from birds to chains of logic to the layout of the ancient altar. Let's take that final step back and zoom all the way out. What does all of this really mean? What's the big takeaway from this incredible intellectual journey?
So what have we really learned here? Well, first off, this is a system of debate. It's not just a book of answers. We also saw that logic is the main tool in the toolbox, but its limits are constantly being pushed and tested. And we've seen how these massive principles get built, not from a single command, but from these long, interconnected chains of reasoning. And maybe the biggest thing of all, the goal isn't just to find the right answer. It's to rigorously explore every single possibility on the way there. And this is probably the single best way to think about the Talmud. It is not some static, dusty old law code that was just written down once. No, it's the living, breathing transcript of a conversation that has been going on for centuries, full of arguments, counter-arguments, and brand new discoveries at every single turn. Which leaves us with this one last big thought. What we've been watching is a system that is obsessed not just with the rules themselves, but with the rules for making the rules. It's a system built on total transparency, where the process of how you got to an answer is just as important as the answer itself. And that is a really powerful idea to think about.